Your cat is asleep on the sofa. She weighs maybe 10 pounds. She complains when dinner is late. She may be frightened of the vacuum cleaner. And yet, hidden inside her cells is a genetic story that connects her to lions, tigers, leopards, lynxes, and every other living member of the cat family. Scientists have spent decades comparing CatDNA. And one landmark study did something remarkable. Researchers analyzed genetic material from all living cat species recognized in that study to reconstruct the feline family tree. What they found was not one simple line from big wildcat to small house cat. It was an explosion. Modern cats split into 8 major evolutionary lineages, spreading across continents through a series of ancient migrations. And all of this diversification happened surprisingly recently on the evolutionary clock, within roughly the last 11 million years. So the cat watching birds from your window is not a miniature tiger. But she is a part of the same extraordinary family experiment. And here is where the story becomes even stranger. More recent genome research has shown that cat chromosomes are unusually stable compared with those of some other mammals. In a 2023 Nature Genetics study, scientists built near-gapless genome assemblies for 5 cat species and found relatively few large duplicated DNA segments. One reason feline chromosomes have changed less dramatically over time. In other words, nature kept much of the basic feline genetic architecture remarkably intact, while producing animals as different as a house cat, a jungle cat, and a leopard. But not every part of the genome stayed quiet. One region of the X chromosome appears to have been a hot zone of evolutionary change. A repetitive DNA element called DXZ4 evolved faster than 99.5% of the genome in that study. Researchers believe changes in this region may have helped create reproductive barriers between some cat species. Think about that for a moment. The difference between 2 species may not always begin with a new fang, a longer leg, or a different coat. Sometimes the story begins in a tiny piece of DNA that changes how chromosomes behave. And now look back at your cat. Because the most interesting question is not whether she has tiger DNA. Of course, cats share ancestry. The real question is this: how much of the ancient hunter is still written into the cat living in your home? Quite a lot. When researchers compared the domestic cat genome with wild cats and other mammals, they found strong evolutionary signals in genes associated with a meat-based predatory lifestyle, including lipid metabolism. They also found selection in genes involved in sensory systems, especially vision and hearing. That does not mean scientists discovered a single hunting gene. Biology is far more complicated than that. But it does mean that millions of years of being a specialized predator left fingerprints across the feline genome, which helps explain something every cat owner has seen. Your cat can be sleeping peacefully 1 second, and then a tiny movement across the room transforms her. Her eyes lock, her body lowers, her back legs prepare. And suddenly, the little animal who was demanding a warm blanket looks like she has remembered a job her ancestors have been doing for millions of years. That is not a tiger trapped inside your cat. It is evolution still doing its work. But hunting genes are only half the story. Because scientists also asked a much more personal question. What changed when wildcats began living beside humans? And the answer may explain why your cat chooses your sofa, your food, and sometimes you. That is where the DNA story becomes surprisingly emotional. So what changed when wildcats began living beside humans? Probably less than you might expect. Genetic studies trace domestic cats mainly to the Near Eastern wildcat, Felis sylvestris libica. Thousands of years ago, farming settlements created grain stores. Grain attracted rodents, and rodents attracted wildcats. The leading scientific picture is not that humans captured cats and redesigned them. Some wildcats simply moved closer. The bolder, more tolerant animals gained a new hunting ground. Humans benefited because cats killed rodents. Over generations, a relationship began that neither side may have planned. In other words, your cat's ancestors may have entered human life largely on their own terms, which, if you know cats, feels suspiciously appropriate. But living beside humans did leave genetic fingerprints. A major domestic cat genome study found selection signals in regions containing genes linked, in studies of other animals, to memory, fear conditioning, and stimulus-reward learning. That does not mean scientists found a love humans gene. They did not. But the findings are consistent with behavioral changes playing a role as cats adapted to life around people. And here is the remarkable part. Domestication did not erase the hunter. So when your cat stalks a toy, investigates a new smell, climbs high, or freezes at a sound you barely noticed, you are watching ancient feline biology at work. And when that same little predator curls up beside you and falls asleep, you are watching the other side of the story. A cat can remain unmistakably a cat and still form a close bond with a human. So no, there is not literally a tiger hiding inside your house cat. The science is more interesting than that. There is an ancient feline blueprint shaped across millions of years, followed by a much more recent chapter written beside us. Tonight, look at your cat for a moment, the eyes of a hunter, the instincts of a wild lineage, and a life now intertwined with yours. That may be the most surprising thing written in her DNA. Subscribe to Cat Code ReleVADED, because the more science discovers about cats, the more extraordinary the animal beside us becomes.